So, let me tell you about the day the Vorrkai Dominion decided to invade Earth. And yes, I know what you're thinking. Another species, another bad decision, another entry in the galaxy's longest-running list of catastrophic miscalculations. You would be correct. But this one was special. This one deserves its own chapter, its own monument, its own cautionary plaque bolted to the front door of every military academy in the known universe. Something simple, something honest, maybe just, do not. My name is Thesuvok, Senior Intelligence Analyst for the Collective Oversight Bureau, and I was there. I watched it happen in real time from a monitoring station roughly 4 light-years away, sipping something warm through a nutrient tube, thinking, oh, this is going to be a very short war. I was right. I was just wrong about who it would be short for. Let me set the scene properly, because context matters enormously here. The year, by human reckoning, was not important. What was important was that the Vorrkai had just finished absorbing 3 neighboring civilizations in 18 months. 3, each one a species that had been spacefaring for centuries. Each one reduced to a tributary state, their fleets dismantled, their leadership restructured, their resources redirected toward Vorrkai expansion. They were on a streak. They felt unstoppable. They had the kind of institutional confidence that comes right before the universe reaches down and flicks you off the board like an unwanted game piece. Their supreme executor, a being named Dravath Son, tall, silver-plated in ceremonial armor, possessor of approximately 11 honorary military titles and 0 actual combat experience, had looked at his intelligence reports on Earth and made a decision that historians would later describe, very charitably, as optimistic. The report said, minimal space presence, no interstellar military capability, single inhabited world, population approximately 8 billion, geopolitically fragmented, no unified defense command. What the report did not say, because nobody had thought to ask, was what those 8 billion had been doing for the last 10,000 years. Dravath Son looked at that report, straightened his 11 titles, and said, and I am translating loosely here. This will be a demonstration, not a campaign. He sent 43 warships. 43? Now, to be fair to Dravath Son, and I want to be very clear that I am being exceptionally generous here, 43 Vorrkai warships was not a small force. Each vessel carried between 300 and 800 combat-ready soldiers. The flagship alone, the Eternal Verdict, was nearly 2 kilometers long, armed with particle lances capable of leveling a city block from orbit, shielded against most conventional munitions, crewed by soldiers who had done this before and expected to do it again. It was a serious force. It was just not a serious enough force. The fleet dropped out of transit approximately 900,000 kilometers from Earth's moon, arrayed in standard intimidation formation, spread wide, running lights blazing, the kind of visual display designed to make a primitive civilization look up at its sky and immediately begin composing surrender terms. Dravath Son opened a broadcast channel on every detectable frequency. His translator matrix had prepared a message in 47 human languages. He had practiced the opening line. He delivered it with, I am told, considerable theatrical weight. He said, people of Earth, your world is now claimed by the Vorrkai Dominion. Resistance will be met with overwhelming force. Compliance will be rewarded with survival. You have 1 planetary rotation to respond. And then he waited. Now, here is where I want you to pay attention, because the next 48 hours is one of the most genuinely fascinating case studies in species-to-species first contact ever recorded. And I have been in this business for a very long time. The humans did not panic, not visibly, not the way the Vorrkai expected. There was no immediate broadcast of terror. No global feed of weeping populations, no frantic attempt at communication, no stammering representative scrambling to beg for terms. The Vorrkai long-range sensors showed elevated electromagnetic activity on the surface. Communications traffic, certainly, but it was orderly, structured, the kind of traffic pattern you see when an organization is not dissolving in fear but coordinating. Dravath Son found this mildly curious. His analysts attributed it to shock. "They do not yet understand what they face," one of them reportedly said, with the sort of serene confidence that you really genuinely should not feel when you're looking at a species you've spent exactly 3 weeks researching. What was actually happening on Earth's surface was something the Vorrkai had no conceptual framework for, because what the humans were doing, in bunkers, in hardened facilities, in mountains, in ocean floors, in places that appeared on no publicly available map, was waking things up. I need you to understand something about humanity that most species miss on the first pass, and a few miss permanently because they run out of time to correct their understanding. Humans are a paradoxical species. They are fragmented, argumentative, passionate to the point of dysfunction, prone to fighting each other over things that would make any neutral observer deeply confused. Left to their own devices on a Tuesday afternoon, you will find them arguing about food, arguing about lines on maps, arguing about which of their sports teams is superior, arguing about things that happened 200 years ago as if the participants are still in the room. You look at this species and your brain, whatever shape your brain is, says, these creatures could not organize a planetary defense. They can barely organize a meeting. This is a very natural conclusion. It is also completely, catastrophically wrong. Because what you are missing, what Draveth Sohn missed, what his 37 analysts missed, is that humans have spent the majority of their recorded history at war, not occasional war, not ritual conflict. Continuous, inventive, absolutely committed organized killing of one another, on a scale that most spacefaring civilizations find genuinely difficult to process when they first read the history files. They had invented the crossbow while others were still figuring out agriculture. They had developed iron metallurgy specifically because it made better weapons. They had created chemistry, physics, mathematics, ballistics, orbital mechanics, and at every single step along the way, someone had immediately looked at the new discovery and thought, how do I make this kill something more efficiently? The nuclear weapon, the submarine, the aircraft carrier, the cruise missile, the railgun, the autonomous targeting system, the bunker-penetrating munition, the electronic warfare suite that could blind a radar network from 3,000 kilometers away. 40,000 years of applied violence, refined into systems that were now, at this particular moment, being powered on. The human coordinator on record, a woman named Petra Van Lund, deputy director of something that officially did not exist, picked up a very secure phone in a very deep facility somewhere beneath the Swiss Alps, and said 7 words to the people on the other end of the line. She said, "Authorization confirmed. Bring everything to ready status." And from 4 continents and 2 ocean floors, things that had been sleeping for years, maintained, tested, updated, but never used, opened their eyes. The first thing Draveth Sohn noticed was the silence breaking. At hour 19 of his 24-hour ultimatum, a single human transmission reached the eternal verdict. Not a negotiator, not a diplomat, a military officer, a woman named Commander Yuki Bressan, representing a coalition command that Vorrkai intelligence had not known existed, speaking in measured, precise tones that the translator matrix rendered perfectly. She said, "Vorrkai Fleet, this is United Earth Defense Command. We have received your ultimatum. Our response is as follows. You are currently within engagement range of 14 orbital defense platforms, which you have not detected. You are also being tracked by 63 surface-launched intercontinental systems, which you have not detected. We have additionally activated 4 previously classified deep space interdiction arrays positioned behind your current formation, which you have definitely not detected. We recommend you hold your current position and await further communication. Any hostile action will be interpreted as the beginning of hostilities. We would prefer that it not be." Draveth Sohn looked at his sensor officer. His sensor officer looked back at him. Neither of them said anything for what I am told was a very long 4 seconds, and then every Vorrkai sensor array on 43 ships simultaneously lit up like a festival, because the humans had turned on the targeting locks. All of them, at once. Not as an attack, just as a signal. Just to let the Vorrkai instruments confirm, in real time, that every single thing Commander Bresson had just described was exactly where she said it was. 14 orbital platforms, previously invisible, now painted bright on every scanner, weapons hot, tracking solutions locked, 63 surface systems, trajectories already calculated, sitting like coiled springs across the planet's surface, each one tagged to a specific Vorrkai hull. And behind the fleet, exactly as promised, 4 deep space arrays, things that looked, to Vorrkai sensors, less like weapons platforms and more like something that had been specifically designed to make sure nobody left the area without permission. Dravath Sohn's tactical officer, a veteran of the 3 previous campaigns, a being named Korvath Anna, who had never once in his career filed a report recommending retreat, turned to his supreme executor and filed a report recommending retreat. "Sir," Korvath Anu said, "these targeting solutions are not defensive, they are preemptive. These systems were not constructed to stop an invasion. They were constructed to destroy a fleet. There is a meaningful difference." Dravath Sohn stared at the sensor display, at the 14 platforms, at the 63 ground signatures, at the 4 arrays sitting patiently behind his fleet like a closed door. He had brought 43 ships to a demonstration. It had become, very quietly and very efficiently, a trap, and the trap had not sprung yet. The humans were waiting. The humans, apparently, were giving him a chance to think. Dravath Sohn was silent for a long time. Then he said, very quietly, "How long have those orbital platforms been there?" His intelligence chief checked again. Cross-referenced construction signatures, energy output, material composition. "Decades," she said. "Some of them, longer." Dravath Sohn closed his eyes. Somewhere on the surface of Earth, in a facility beneath the Swiss Alps, Petra Van Lund poured herself a cup of coffee, sat back in her chair and waited. She had been waiting for this conversation her entire career. She was very comfortable waiting a little longer. Dravath Sohn did not sleep that night. I know this because the collective's monitoring station intercepted his internal ship communications, and what we heard from the eternal verdict during those long hours was not the sound of a conquering fleet making preparation for assault. It was the sound of 43 crews sitting very, very still, trying not to do anything that a nervous automated targeting system might interpret as aggressive. Weapons officers had their hands in their laps. Navigation crews were not touching controls. Someone on the 3rd escort vessel apparently sneezed loudly near a console and caused a 4-minute internal panic. It was, professionally speaking, one of the most entertaining nights of my career. But humor aside, and I say this as someone who once laughed for 6 uninterrupted minutes at a species that tried to invade a gas giant, the situation on those 43 ships was genuinely precarious. Because the Vorrkai were not cowards. They were experienced, disciplined, well-equipped soldiers who had crushed 3 civilizations in 18 months. The problem was not capability. The problem was information. Specifically, the sudden, nauseating awareness that they did not have nearly enough of it. Korvath Anu spent those hours doing what good tactical officers do when everything goes sideways. He rebuilt the picture from scratch. He pulled every scrap of data his sensors could gather on the platforms, the surface installations, the deep space arrays, and he laid it all out in sequence. And then he sat with it for a long time. And then he went back to Dravath Sohn and delivered a briefing that I would genuinely pay to have a full recording of. The summary, as best as we reconstructed it from intercepted fragments, went something like this. The 14 orbital platforms were not recent constructions. The oldest ones dated back nearly 40 years by human reckoning, built quietly, maintained quietly, upgraded incrementally, their energy signatures masked by what Korvath Anu could only describe as, and this is a direct translation, embarrassingly sophisticated passive camouflage that we had absolutely no reason to look for because nothing we have ever encountered uses this approach. The 63 surface systems were similarly not new. They were part of a planetary defense network that had apparently been in development for generations, built not by a single unified government, because as Vorrkai intelligence had correctly noted, humanity had no single unified government, but by a series of interlocking agreements between nations that competed bitterly on nearly every other subject, and had nonetheless, quietly, without fanfare, decided that certain things were worth cooperating on. Things like not getting conquered by something from space. Korvath Enu's voice, in the intercepted fragments, carried a quality I had rarely heard from a Vorrkai military officer. It was not fear exactly, it was something more specific. The particular tone of a professional who has just discovered that the opponent has been playing a different game entirely, and has been playing it for much longer. They built this in secret, he told Dravath Son. Not from us specifically, from each other. Each component was classified by its nation of origin, shared only under treaty. The full picture, the integrated picture, may not even be visible to most of their own population. They built a planetary shield, and then they forgot to tell themselves about it, or chose not to. I am not certain which is more alarming. Dravath Son asked about the 4 deep space arrays. Korvath Enu was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I believe those were built specifically for a scenario like this one. The geometry is deliberate. They are positioned not to defend the planet. They are positioned to prevent a fleet at our current coordinates from achieving a safe transit jump. Something calculated for them specifically. Something that assumes a fleet will be sitting exactly where we are sitting. Another silence. They planned for us, Dravath Son said. They planned for someone, Korvath Enu replied. I suspect they have been planning for someone for a very long time. Down on Earth's surface, Commander Yuki Bresson was in a conference room with 7 other people, eating a bowl of rice and watching the Vorrkai fleet on a tactical display. The fleet had not moved in 11 hours. This was, by all metrics, a good sign. Bresson had been in her current role for 9 years, and had spent most of those years hoping she would never actually have to use the thing she was responsible for maintaining. She was the kind of person who takes her job extremely seriously precisely because she hopes the job never becomes necessary. She was also, incidentally, the 3rd generation of her family to hold a position in United Earth Defense Command. Her grandmother had helped design the first orbital platform. Her father had overseen the integration of the Deep Space Array network. Yuki Bresson had grown up understanding, in a way most humans never had to, exactly what was waiting in the dark between stars. She had briefed exactly this scenario 112 times in training exercises. She had always hoped the 113th would also be training. Across the table from her sat a man named Obiageli Pharaoh. Tall, quiet, the kind of still that comes from decades of practiced calm, who served as the civilian liaison to the coalition command. His job, in theory, was to make sure that the people with access to 63 planetary-scale weapons systems remembered that diplomacy existed. They haven't moved, he said, looking at the display. No, Bresson agreed. That's good. That's very good. Pharaoh looked at her. Are we going to give them an off-ramp? Bresson ate a spoonful of rice. We already did. We gave them 14 hours ago. We told them to hold position. They held position. That was the off-ramp. I mean a verbal one. A path that doesn't require their commander to walk back onto his ship having publicly failed. Bresson considered this for a moment. She was not a cruel person. She was a thorough one, which is different. Cruelty enjoys the suffering of an opponent. Thoroughness simply accounts for all variables, including the ego of a cornered commander with 11 honorary titles and 43 warships and nowhere comfortable to point them. Draft a communication, she said. Offer a channel. No demands, no terms, just an open channel. Let him come to the table on his own feet. Pharaoh nodded and reached for a secure terminal. What followed was 3 hours of the most painstakingly careful diplomatic negotiation I have ever had the privilege of observing from 4 light years away. Dravath Son, to his credit, accepted the channel. He came to it without his 11 titles listed. That detail was noted, interpreted correctly by Bresson as a signal that he was speaking as a military officer rather than a political figurehead, and met in kind. They spoke through translators. They spoke carefully. They spoke like two people who were both very aware of exactly how many things could go catastrophically wrong in the next several hours, and were both, for their own reasons, invested in ensuring that none of those things happened. Dravath Sohn asked one question that Bresson said she would remember for the rest of her life. He said, "How long?" She didn't ask him to clarify. She knew what he meant. "The first platform was commissioned 41 years ago," she said. "The Deep Space Network was completed 8 years ago. The surface grid has been active in some form for 60 years, though most of those systems have been upgraded several times." A pause on his end. "We found no record of this," he said. "Our survey teams found no evidence." "You weren't supposed to," Bresson said. Not unkindly. Simply as a fact. Another pause. "Longer. Your species," Dravath Sohn said slowly, "fights itself constantly. Our records show continuous internal conflict. We assessed this as strategic weakness, fragmentation, an inability to coordinate at scale." Bresson looked at Obiageli Ferro across the table. He looked back at her. Something passed between them that was not quite amusement. Too tired for amusement, too old for it, but was close. "We do fight each other constantly," she said. "That part of your assessment was correct. But we've also had 60 years to look at what's out there. And when we look out there, certain things become less important than other things. Not forever. We'll go right back to arguing about the other things the moment this conversation is over, I promise you that. But this," she gestured at nothing in particular, meaning everything in particular. "This we agreed on." Dravath Sohn was quiet for a very long time. "I want to tell you that there was a moment of real drama here. A moment where it could have gone the other way. Where pride or desperation or the weight of 3 previous easy victories might have pushed him toward a decision that would have made this story much shorter and much grimmer. I want to be honest with you about that. The outcome was not guaranteed. Nothing is ever guaranteed when you put 2 species with functional weapons in close proximity and ask them to make good choices under pressure." But Dravath Sohn had not gotten to his position, 11 titles notwithstanding, by being entirely incapable of reading a room. He had 43 ships, several thousand soldiers, and a fleet that had just discovered it was sitting inside a killing box, built by a species that had apparently been constructing killing boxes as a hobby for 4 decades. He had a fleet that could fight. He also had a fleet that would, in all measurable probability, not survive the attempt. He made a choice. "We will withdraw," he said. "I will require a corridor, a confirmed safe path through your interdiction network. We'll provide coordinates," Bresson said. "You'll have a clear lane. We ask only that you do not return under arms. If your government wishes to open formal contact through the collective's diplomatic registry, that channel is available." "That is acceptable." "Good." A pause. "For what it's worth, I'm glad we're having this conversation instead of the other one." I believe Dravath Sohn understood what she meant. The Vorrkai fleet began its withdrawal at hour 29. Orderly, disciplined, I will give them that much. No scrambling, no panicked scatter. They moved in formation through the corridor Bresson's team had provided, and the 14 orbital platforms tracked them the entire way, and the 63 surface systems stayed warm and awake until the last ship's transit signature faded into nothing, and then, slowly, in sequence, everything went back to sleep. The arrays powered down last. Somewhere in the Swiss Alps, Petra van Lund finished her coffee, set down the cup, and authorized the stand-down sequence. In the monitoring station, I sat back and exhaled something that my species does when we have been holding tension in our secondary respiratory system for too long, and I said to my colleague Brenneth Voss, who had watched the whole thing beside me, I said, "File the full report. Complete archive. Every frame." Brenneth Voss looked at me. "Analysis, summary?" "Yes," I said. "Keep it short. 4 lines." He looked at me expectantly. I thought about it for a moment. "Line 1, I said. "Humanity does not advertise its defenses." Line 2, "This is not because they forgot to." Line 3, The Vorrkai Dominion engaged a species with 60 years of active planetary defense infrastructure and assessed them as undefended. Line 4. Recommend mandatory review of all survey protocols. Specifically, look for what is not visible. Brenneth Voss typed. And the recommendation for the Dominion, Standard Conflict Avoidance Advisory, I said. +1 addendum, which is, I looked at the empty patch of space on our display where 43 Vorrkai warships had been. 12 hours ago. Absolutely certain of an easy victory. If a species has been fighting itself continuously for 40,000 years, I said, and has still not managed to destroy itself, do not assume this means they are weak. Consider the alternative. Consider that maybe, just maybe, the fighting is what made them very, very good at it. Brenneth Voss finished typing. He read it back. He nodded slowly. Out in the dark, somewhere between stars, Dravath Son's fleet was running for home, 11 honorary titles considerably lighter than they had felt on the way out. And on a pale blue world, orbiting an unremarkable star, 8 billion humans went back to arguing with each other about the things they always argued about. Food, borders, sports teams, things that happened 200 years ago. While beneath mountains and beneath oceans, the machines that had briefly opened their eyes closed them again, and rested and waited, patient as geology, for the next time someone from the dark decided to knock. They always waited. They had always been waiting. That, in the end, was the part nobody ever saw coming.